Okay, well, hello. Welcome to Croydon Vineyard. My name's Andy Brims. I'm part of the team, and I'm absolutely thrilled today to be joined by Rachel Turner from Parenting for Faith. Our senior pastor, Tom and Leslie Thompson. Leslie, in particular, I think she must have shares in the Rachel Turner brand. All the time, she is on at us as a team and on at us as parents to get the resources that the Parenting for Faith guys put out. So we've been blessed by that as a church already. I've personally been blessed by Rachel. I remember she was at one of the Vineyard Leaders conferences, and there's lots of seminars, and you go into seminars and you're like, okay, let's see what you've got. And just within 2 minutes, it was like, wow, this lady knows what she's speaking about, and this is helpful for me, so I need it. So we're absolutely delighted to have her on with us. And we've had questions from various people in the church come in, and we just want to talk through parenting for faith in general, and then a little bit about parenting for faith in lockdown as well. So Rachel, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me. And I have to say, I feel it's slightly unfair because Leslie came to the Forge, which is the conference I run, and I put her in my small group because I wanted to learn from her. And I just spent the entire 6 hours that we had in small groups just like listening to Leslie and gaining her wisdom and sitting at her feet. So I sort of feel like I'm her biggest fan more than anything else. So I feel so privileged to get to be here with you.
Awesome. So Rachel is the author of many books. I've got one here, Parenting for Faith. I've got an ink splodge on the cover, I'm so sorry. Parenting Children for a Life of Faith. One of the many that Leslie has passed our way. So she's an author. She runs a thing called Parenting for Faith. Really experienced children's worker. So Rachel, could you just give us a little bit of your background, a little bit of your story, how you came to faith, how you got into the kids' work thing, and who you are?
Well, that's a big question. I became a Christian when I was 4 years old. I distinctly remember it. There was a little Jesus on like a flannel graph, like he was this little thing, and he was like put on the cross and came down. And like at 4, I just remember having this intense sense of my sin and the grace and love Jesus had for me. And I remember the skirt that the teacher was wearing, and I just remember like having this moment of like Jesus just picking me up and kissing me, and it was this wonderful experience. And so my childhood was really like learning how to walk with God. And I remember worshiping in my bed and feeling him come close. And so my journey with God is like everyone else's journey. I just remember it being really young. And that sort of made me quite passionate that doesn't matter what your age or capability, God has a vibrant relationship for you. And it just looks different for everybody. But I had no interest in youth or children's ministry at all. And came to this country, and God sort of sideswiped me and sort of throwed me into something that I had no intention of getting into, and just began to fall in love with seeing people of all ages meet and know God for themselves. And so I just sort of waded into it. I'm not the most creative. I'm not very arty. I can't do puppets. So I sort of did it like me rather than doing it like everybody else, and found a path to this. So as I was a children's pastor, I then began to help families because I was seeing all the cool stuff. Like in children's ministry, I can see kids crying in worship, and I can see them meeting with God and, forgiving people. And then, parents are like barely hanging on. And I thought, this is like the best stuff of life. And so I got into resourcing parents because I think helping your kids meet and know God is one of the greatest joys you can ever have. And I wanted parents to know that joy and to step into that space. So that's why I started Parenting for Faith.
Amazing. So you obviously do seminars and books worth of content. But if you cast your mind back to pre-lockdown days, and you've got kind of the 5-10 minutes, I know that you talk a lot about kids being God connected rather than God smart. So just tell us a little bit about your kind of philosophy of parenting and how you help parents, how you equip parents.
Sure. For me, I think, for children's ministries and churches and parents, I think we have accidentally fallen into the pattern of helping our kids be God smart. I think because it's controllable and kids are very uncontrollable. And so we think, what's the one thing I can do? And so we think, oh, I can teach them about God. And so we as parents and churches teach them Bible stories and teach them Bible verses and teach them about God. And then hope that they transform into what we really want them to have, which is this deep God connection where they can hear God's voice and they love him genuinely and they want to give their whole lives to that service. And we don't know how to make the connection. And I began to be really passionate that I believe churches and parents can help their kids actually be God connected, to know how to live that vibrant two-way life with God now in the immediate and for their future. And so I began to sort of look at how do I give people skills to be able to do this, because we want it. We desperately want our children to know God's voice and follow him and do that. And I don't want us to feel trapped just holding a Bible story book going, I hope this works. And so I began to look at what's the best way to do this. And I was a church worker. So I was like, obviously it's through the church. And so started to try to do that within the church. And I could get these kids, I could teach them about God and have them encounter the Holy Spirit. And they'd be praying for healing at schools and we'd be seeing healing. And then it's like they'd go home and then nothing would happen. And I was very arrogant at the time and was like, how can I get parents to do what I'm telling them to do so they can get on board with my program? And I don't know if you've ever had God sort of shove scripture at you and like cleave your soul in half. And he brought me to Deuteronomy 6:4-9, which was his plan for the discipleship of children, in which he says that we're to talk about God in our everyday lives, when we walk along the road, when we lie down, when we get up, to paint it on the door frames of our houses and on our gates. And I realized in that moment that I'm in none of the places that God has ordained children's ministry discipleship to happen. It's in the ordinary, boring bits of life, when you're waiting for your other kid to get out of swimming, and when you've cooked the same meal 14 times, and when you wake up your kid for the 3,000th time. That's where he is, because that's where he wants to be, and that's where discipleship happens. So I need to get out of the way and help parents feel the awesomeness that they are in, and how powerful they are in the spiritual lives of their kids. And so my whole approach is to help parents feel competent and confident that they've got this, and that God is going to do great things in their kids' lives. And they themselves, just as they are and perfect as we all are the perfect gift that God has given to our kids to help them meet and know him.
Amazing. Okay, well, this goes into a question that we've had, which we can jump into the detail a little bit more of. So if we've got parents in our church who've recently come to faith, or kind of recently come back to church and back to their faith, and their parents. So if somebody's kind of just getting started out on this, they're thinking, oh, I love Jesus, I want to be a Christian, I want my kids to follow Jesus. As a family, we've not done anything like this before. What advice can you give them? What should they tackle first? What are some of the key skills? Where do they go?
Great question. By the way, super impressed that it comes up on the screen.
Wow, no expense spared.
I want to say you got this. You don't have to be anybody else but you. You don't have to have a theological degree. You don't have to know all the right things to say. This isn't about doing Christianity perfectly and showing your kids this is what a perfect Christian looks like, because none of us would do any of this. Maybe when I'm 97, would I be actually good enough to be like me? What the gift that you are to your kids is that you are imperfect and on the journey, because what our kids need to see is an authentic life lived in front of them with God. They need to know who is God in ordinary life. Who is God when you're sad, and who is God when you're angry, and who is God when the world shuts down around them, and how do I talk to him about it, and how do I question him, and what does he look like in everyday life? And that is what we're positioned for. So if you're just starting out, I'd suggest that you just start creating windows into your life. We talk about creating windows a lot. It's just, faith is such a private thing that happens in your own head and heart that it's hard to see into somebody else's experience. And so if you just begin to say, Well, you know what? Last night I was in bed and I was talking to God about this, and I was just telling him, I am so bored of being at home. Just that little window, just saying that sentence of letting them see a little bit into what it looks like. Your kids may never know that they can just casually hang out in bed and chat to him about stuff. Uh, just talking about what it looks like for you, or I'm so frustrated, I'm so tired, I'm going to go play my music. That is my favorite worship song. I'm just going to play it and I'm going to sing to myself. And because that always makes my heart feel calmer, because it just reminds me like there's more than this house. And when you say that, your kids are going, whoa, so you chat to God when you're in bed and you listen to music that reminds you that God is bigger than this place. And all of a sudden you're just showing your kids, this is what it looks like for me. And you know what? It'll look like for you differently. What does it look like for you? And so wonder together, have conversations, let them see you doing it when you're doing it. You know, if you read your Bible and that's something that you can manage to do during the day, then, you know, do it in front of them. If you usually do it on your phone, what they think is you're on Facebook, whip out an actual Bible and let them see it. Let them see you pray. Let them see you struggle. Let them see God in your life, because God in a life is powerful. It's so much better than any words you can describe it when they can see it, when they can see that you're tired and you say, you know, I have no energy today. Could you pray for me? And have them pray for you, and then go, oh, every time you speak, God responds, because he always responds. And I needed that. Thank you for praying for me. It's powerful. These little moments, be you, and let them see it for your life and be willing to go on the journey together.
So it's maybe this idea of windows and things like, you know, if the default is to read your Bible on the phone in your bedroom with the door shut, it's maybe doing that in the living room with the actual book. And what would you say to the parent who's a bit like, oh, I just need the uninterrupted time, I need a little bit of space?
Yeah, you can do a couple of things. One, sometimes you're like, I'm just gonna do it in front of them so that they see that the Bible actually exists. And you can then be like, hold on, I just need this moment. Or you can say, I really need some alone time with God. Like, it's just what I need. And so I'm going to go into my room and do that. Now, you can sometimes leave the door slightly open. That's really helpful for kids, because if you leave it open, then, because they don't know what you're doing in there. You know, Jesus himself could have brought you tea and scones. They don't know. So if you're like, I'm just going to go in here and I'm going to spend some time with God, and you leave it open, and every time they try to come in, you're like, excuse me, it's me and Jesus time. I need you to go back out. Then they can see it and they know it. I've had so many kids report to me, my dad sleeps with God, because every time he would go away with God, he'd take a nap. And they could see it and they could know what it's like. So feel free to leave that open or describe it to them. If your kids just won't, try it. But if they won't, then close it. But describe it. So I'm just going to go and I'm going to lay on my bed and I'm going to just chat to him in my head and just tell him everything. And I have my Bible there sometimes, because he sometimes pokes me and is like, oh, hey, remember this part. And I read his words. And so I'm going to go do that for about 20 minutes and then I'll come out. It might be quiet. You might hear me singing. Don't worry about it. It's just me and God hanging out. And it just lets them know what it looks like. Because at one point, they're going to have enough of everybody else. And if they know what to do, I've had so many families say, that's what I told my kid. And my kid's like, I'm going to go spend some time with God. And they'll poke their head in and they're laying on the bed with the Bible out, doing the same thing, because they've been facilitated to know what you can do when you need it.
Amazing. So windows is a big idea. I wonder if you could give a little bit of help on if a parent's sat there and thinking, okay, I'd like to talk a little bit more with my kids about the Lord. What are some good questions? What are some good ways into that kind of conversation? Should they just wait for moments when it presents itself, or a bit more intentional? How do we get these kind of conversations going?
Yeah. Very good questions. I suggest that you don't wait for the great opportunity, because they do not exist. I mean, you can wait for the teachable moment for a lifetime, man. Very rarely have I ever known a child be like watching television, then turn to you and be like, tell me about suffering and Jesus. Like, it's just not a normal jump in. And so sometimes it is. Sometimes they have a wondering question. But if you wait for the question, then you feel like you want to shove everything into that one opportunity. And you can create opportunities all over the place. For me, I find we have two ways you can do it. One is framing, which is basically doing what you already do as a parent. We're constantly explaining stuff to our kids, like, this is how you cross the road. This is why we can't go outside. This is why we wear masks. We're just constantly explaining life. And sometimes kids need explaining, and that's an interesting route in. Like, every time, if you're watching TV, every time I see someone angry, I'm just reminded that it's not really anger. They're feeling afraid or worried, because like in this one, the guy's really angry, but what he's really feeling is afraid he's going to lose his friends. And sometimes I forget that in life. And I forget that if I'm ever feeling angry about something, it's probably because I'm scared. And I usually talk to God about that. Do you ever feel scared and want to talk to God? So sometimes it's just sort of framing something. Or every time I watch Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, it makes me cry because it reminds me of Jesus. Just sort of helping them see where God is and asking them, do you ever think that or feel that, is a good way in. But another way in are questions that don't have the right answers. Is another great way to just start it up. So on the Parenting for Faith podcast, we always end the podcast with a question to start an interesting conversation with your kids. So right now there's like 62 questions that are on these podcasts. And they're really random questions because the goal is to not teach your kid about something. The goal is to find out what's on their heart and have an interesting conversation. Like, if you had to pick one Bible character to be in lockdown with, who would it be and why? And that is a really interesting conversation about who and why and what their personalities would be like and what would they bring. And, I would not want to be on lockdown with Jeremiah because he's just going to be bringing challenges from God all the time. I'm not sure I can handle that. But who would you want to be in lockdown with? Or did Jesus spill his milk? There's a big debate in children that I always have because the concept of sin, sometimes kids fall into the trap of thinking mistakes are sin. So they'll think that they spill their milk, it's sin. So did Jesus ever drop a glass of milk and spill it all over the place? Or did Jesus ever accidentally offend someone? And then you have a great conversation about the nature of sin and mistakes and the nature of Jesus, and ask a question that doesn't necessarily have a right answer, because then you're just talking together and wondering and may end up going, I don't know, and teaching our kids that it's all about the journey of discovery of a mysterious and beautiful and knowable God, and we're all on the journey of that.
Amazing. So let's talk about conflict a little bit, because that's going to be a big thing in families, maybe even more so at the moment. So talk a little bit about how, as parents, if we feel like we get something wrong with our kids, how we can go about that, and then maybe also the kind of sibling on sibling World War III is about to break out. Help us with that. Okay.
Big questions. Oh, right. Okay. What was the first part? The first part of that was.
If I do something wrong as a parent, for the 63rd time that day.
Right. Yes. I was about to say, so the majority of my day is getting things wrong with my kid. And I think it's a great opportunity because if I see it as my job as a parent is to be perfect all the time and to get it right, then I'm just constantly disappointed in myself all the time. But actually, I get to show my kid, one, that I'm not perfect yet. And I don't expect them to be perfect. We're all on a journey of being transformed to be more and more like Christ. And I'm not finished yet. And so I'm going to make mistakes, and you're going to make mistakes, and I'm going to make bad choices, and you're going to make bad choices, because we're still in the process of being transformed. And so when I make a mistake, what the opportunity is an opportunity to show my kid what humility looks like, and what good apologies look like. Not the resentful sorry that we see them do with their siblings, but actually, what does a genuine, heartfelt apology look like? And how can we frame for them what was going on in our hearts and how we're going to walk that out and fix it? So, if you end up, shouting at your kids, to come back to them and say, I'm so sorry. My heart has been not peaceful today. And it's my job to go to God and find peace with him. And I just have felt buried by the world, and I just haven't taken that time with God. It only takes a little bit for me to go outside and ask him to fill me with his peace. And I just haven't. And I'm sorry that I haven't been able to do that. And I'm sorry that came out of my mouth, that I used my voice and my words and my frustration to try to communicate rather than just communicating fairly. And I apologize. Will you forgive me? That doesn't mean what you did was okay. But I'm now going to try to do it the way I wanted to do it, which is to say what's going on. And, I've asked you to do this, and it's, you can go. That doesn't mean that just because you handled it badly doesn't mean that you lose your authority. It means that you're saying it's okay to be wrong and to ask for apologies. And how did that make you feel? And I never want to make you feel like that. And I'm sorry. Thank you. Will you forgive me? Thank you for forgiving me. Let's reconnect about that. Now let's talk about that thing that we had. So that sense of apology. And also one thing that we've noticed in lockdown is apologizing to your spouse. Often that we found is if you have a partner at home, the conflict happens and then it gets resolved in private, which is great. But sometimes it means that kids don't see the resolution. So they see a bit of a stress, and then, then the kids go out or we go out, and then we come back and we seem to be fine. But if the kids don't see that, and so sometimes we found that in lockdown, a good discipline is to then bring it up later and to almost redo the apology in front of the kids, so you can go have the actual conversation and then come back and just say, hey, Daddy, I just want to say I'm really sorry for speaking to you like that. I feel like I was being unfair and what I was asking you to do, and I was impatient with you, and I apologize. And then you can be like, oh, I forgive you. I understand that. It did make me feel that. And so you're almost modeling what that reconciliation looks like. Because when we look at the sibling issue, they often don't have models for what that looks like. So we're expecting them to find conflict resolution.
What you mean.
Without having seen it lots of times. And so actually the little tips we get into and the stresses that we experience, if you put in your head, actually, I am modeling for my kids how to walk out conflict, how to apologize genuinely, how to notice how my behavior affects others. Then when you say, and you coach them in their process of siblingness, that then gives them something to look for. Does that?
Yeah, it's really helpful. Really helpful. It almost sounds like that's another big potential window that you were talking about before with the conflict. Yeah. Okay. Well, you've touched on it a little bit, but tell us a little bit more then about some of the differences lockdown is bringing and what you're seeing in terms of what's happening in families and maybe a little bit of help.
Sure. What are some key differences lockdown brings? Oh, man. I think lockdown has a lot of opportunities and a lot of stresses and struggles. But you've always, in some ways, it's the one thing that hasn't changed. Parents have always been the main influencers of their kids' lives. They've always had, church. If you bring your kid to church every Sunday, which we don't, but if you did, you get 100 hours of church a year. And the average parent, when natural life is happening, you get 2,000 to 3,000 hours a year with your kids, even more so in lockdown. I think it's like you have in normal life when your kids are going to school and things, your kids have a year's worth of Sundays of time with you in 2 weeks in your house. It's like you now have 3 years worth of Sundays in a week now with your kids. So the impact that you have, just spiritually on the life of your kid is massive. And how we parent for faith is all the normal stuff of creating windows and telling them how you see things and pondering about God and providing encounter stuff. So it's not so much different as it's just intense. Okay. And I think that's what's helpful to remember is you don't have to be anybody different in lockdown. It just feels more intense. It feels more exposing. Your kids are seeing a lot more of your faults than you would like. And if you have teenagers, they're probably pointing out those faults a lot more than you would like. It feels like you can't perform for your kids as much, like you're on and then you're off. And If you've ever under fives parented, you just give up after a while. And some of us are just having to go back into that mode of like, it's nonstop, it's in my face, it's tiring, all of these emotions. And so some of the key differences are that you feel like you have a lot less emotional energy for it. But that doesn't mean it's worthless, and it doesn't mean that it's bad. It just means that you now have opportunities to show your kid how you cope with vulnerability. Like I had a really frustrating day the other day, and I think it's probably the first time my kid has seen me that frustrated with work, that sort of thing. And he really wasn't sure what to do. And I thought, okay, well, this is a really interesting conversation to have, to say, hey, you know what? Sometimes work is stressful, and sometimes I don't know, I can't control other people, and that makes me feel very powerless. And so sometimes I just don't know what to do, and I have to talk about it for like 5 hours at your dad because I need help understanding my words, and I talk to God about it too. That's how often my prayer is. It's just me processing with God. That's why I'm so glad he's in my life. And just, we have these random opportunities to window or to follow the waves of their interest. Some family I know was talking the other day, and the kid was like, you know what we should do? Buy chocolate for the whole, block, not block, but the road, and just like write happy notes for them. And they're like, well, all right, well, that'll be an activity that'll take 4 hours. Sure, why not? And they can just, you have the time to do the random stuff that you want to do, and you have the opportunity to get to know your kids again. And so much of parenting for faith and helping them find God is knowing your kids and saying, this might work for you. And sometimes in the busyness of life, we feel like we don't know our kids as well as we want to. And this is your opportunity to know how your kids' hearts work and what random thoughts hit their brain and what makes them laugh again. And building that connection with your kids is absolutely vital. And then, of course,
amazing.
Yeah, there is a sense of gift in it in some respects, isn't there? We kind of got two contrasting reactions to lockdown reflected in the questions. You've touched on both, but I'm just going to see if we can get a little bit more reaction. So one is common before lockdown, but I think lockdown again, like you say, with the intensity, there's some of us out there, we're just feeling totally overwhelmed, tired, stressed. Like, where do we go? How on earth can I be a role model to my kids? This question says. If somebody really feels like the big sense of overwhelm, where do we go with that?
One, I just want to say you are not alone, and it feels like you're alone in that, but you're not alone, and that doesn't make you a bad parent. I think if I rarely pull this out, but I technically am an expert in parenting, and I officially tell you, you are not a bad parent because you're a human being trapped in a house with small people. Anyone's going to feel overwhelmed. Super nanny would be curled in a corner at this point. So just, that's okay to feel those things. But the other thing is, I think you need to let go of some shoulds. We have a lot of shoulds in our heads. I should be the together parent who wakes up 2 hours before they do. I exercise outside. I spend some time praying, and then I make them all cooked breakfast. Whatever your shoulds are, it could be, your shoulds could just be, I should be able to cope with this. There's so many shoulds, and we end up comparing ourselves to our fantasy version of who we wish we were at this season. And that is exhausting. And so in some ways, I just want to take off all the shoulds off your shoulders. You are who you are in the weirdest situation that none of us could ever imagine. And what your kids need is for you to be there, to feed them, and to let them know that you are there with them and give them words to understand their experience. And anyone can do that, no matter how overwhelmed you feel. So let your now be now, because they're going to be okay. We're going to come out of this on the other end, and they're going to remember the most random stuff that, I know people who've planned these beautiful, like, back garden experiences, and they go camping and candlelight, and I'll Skype with their kids, and their kids are like, Mommy fell into the bath. And that's all they talk. That's all they remembered from last week was the one funny time where Mommy fell in the bath trying to get them out. And it was hilarious. And that is their main memory. And you never know what's going to stick. and they may treasure the things that just cuddling with you. If you're exhausted, put on a movie, gather your children, it's cuddle time, and take a nap. Like, deliberately give yourself permission to go unconscious while watching a movie, and just let them know that's what's happening. Feel free to say, I need time by myself, and go do it. Don't be anybody else but you, because your kids will remember the love and the togetherness and your honesty and the fact that you were there for them. And they will have weird special things. So be you, all the shirts off. And
really helpful. And then at the other end of the spectrum, which will make some people feel a bit sick, but the person who says, I'm actually really enjoying lockdown with my kids. The reading everything on homeschooling, and the kids might not go back to school. But when normality does return, whatever that looks like, what are some of the ways we can keep this sense of gift and special time and getting to know the kids and everything like that? Speak into that a little bit, if you would.
Sure. First of all, I think sometimes it depends on personality. You wouldn't know, but I'm an intense introvert. So lockdown is like my best life, and I'm having a great time. And so some of us is just personality shaped, but I also want to point out that many of us feel these two things like multiple times in the same day.
Yes.
So we wake up and we're like, I can't make it through the day. And then you have this wonderful time and you're like, this is so great, I'm going to miss this. And then at lunch, you're like, get us out. So it's okay to swing between those. I would suggest that what you're learning right now is how your hearts fit best together, how your kids' hearts work. And so one thing that I would notice is love languages. One of the things that's really helpful to get to know your kids is how they best feel loved. And there are, 5 love languages. I'm sure you know them, the sort of quality time and touch and acts of service and words of affirmation and
gifts.
Gifts. Can you tell which one I'm not? So gifts. And those love languages, you just notice how your kid likes being loved and how your kid feels connected to you. And so I would suggest that you really pay attention to what kind of connection patterns work well for your family. And how your one kid always wants to talk to you at bedtime alone, or your other kid really enjoys just waking up early with you for breakfast. And what are the times that their hearts naturally connect with you, so that as normality comes back, you can say and put a language to this language of connection. I feel so connected to you. Like there's nothing between us. We can tell each other anything. We laugh together freely. And I want to write that down. This is what it feels like to feel connected. And going forward, what do we absolutely want to keep in our lives so that we can stay as connected as we are right now? And fight for that connection. And so is it bedtimes? Is it that? And then as you go out of lockdown, you have these opportunities to say, hey, I'm not feeling as connected as we did before. And I think it's probably because we don't have that time at bedtime. Where can we get time together to talk? Because I think that was really important to how our hearts felt with each other. And so establishing what is connecting now will help you have those conversations in the future. Because then it's not behavior. Then it's not, we have to keep doing the bedtime that way. We can say it was the conversation. So what does that look like now? Rather than how do we just do all the things we did now in the future?
Really helpful. Really helpful. I'd love you just to speak into one group in particular, which would be parents of teenagers. It can be very tricky. I know as a church team, we've been looking at some stuff in terms of why it's actually very difficult kind of cocktail of events at the moment for teenagers in particular, and their parents by extension of that. Kind of a lot of shift in terms of what their future might look like or might not look like. That little bit more demand in terms of what they're expected to do, homeschooling wise, studies wise. Can you give any help for parents of teenagers?
Yeah, sure. I think this season is really interesting. One, I think it's really helpful to remember the way their brains are working. is very social. And so if you think about when they were not in lockdown, they have a very complex soap opera drama of all of their friendship groups and all of the emotions that they feel with all of these different people. And they're trying to maintain all of those socially at this point. And so that's quite emotionally draining as it is. But also, your home has now become that intense environment that school kind of felt like. And so you may feel like your teenagers are overreacting to something, but you have to remember their world is very small now. And so if you have 4 people to engage with and one of them is blanking you, that's a massive emotional like impact. And so they are experiencing your home relationships in quite an intense way. And I just want to flag that up. Sometimes we forget that because we're the parents, but all of their sort of relational drama is quite focused on the home, and that can feel quite intense. But the opportunity that comes along there is to coach them through that, to say, those, to validate their emotions, whether they're deeply distressed and disappointed that they can't go to school and finish what they started, whether they're missing people. You have the opportunity to come alongside of them and say, those are real feelings, and I grieve with you, and that I understand why you're feeling sad and upset. And I think teenagers, in my experience as a youth pastor, just want to be understood. And I think sometimes we want to problem solve for our kids, and actually, sitting with them in it and saying, yeah, this is awful, and I understand that, and I'm so sorry, is so powerful for teenagers because they want to be understood. And ask curious questions is a really useful tool for teenagers, because they can sniff an agenda a mile away. They're like, I can sense that you're asking this because you want to make it better, say something, give me advice. And one of the things that you can really build in this season is them knowing that you just want to understand them. And so to say things like, talk to me more about what's going on with James, or tell me how you're feeling about school, or if you could go back right now, what is the thing that you're most stressed about or most worried about? Just asking questions purely to understand. And then at the end go, oh, I can see how you feel that. And then leave it and then walk away. Even if it's the most like advice giving moment, walk away. Because teenagers, building the fact that you trust them with their life, that you understand their feelings and you validate that, allows for that listening home to happen. And you can pray for them, and you can, say, oh, I was just praying for you last night. I pray for you all the time. Do you want me to pray for you now? Because I can either pray for you now when you're in the room or pray for you when you're not here. But just so you know, I am. Is there anything specific you want me to pray for? And just letting your kids know that you are in their corner and you are for them and you trust them and you understand them is one of the most powerful gifts you can give your teenager now, because they're walking some hard stuff, and it's easy to trivialize teenage life, rather than be like, I want to understand it because I want to get on board with it and be on your side. And teenagers are desperate for their parents to be in their corner, so it's a great opportunity.
Amazing.
Just another couple of questions. So church, obviously your main focus, absolutely rightly, is the hundreds, thousands of hours that the parents have at home. But maybe talk a little bit into church involvement at this time. So for us, we have kind of video calls for the different age groups before the e-service that we do on a Sunday morning. We've got families watching together the e-service. We've got social stuff for some of the older kids. So there's different things going on in different families. Some are struggling to get any sort of connection happening, and it's a big enough battle just to get the school stuff done that church feels an extra. Others of them are finding church as a massive lifeline. So help us a little bit with how parents, what you know what I'm saying. Help us.
Yes, I do. I think what I want to say is that it is really helpful to take a step back, because I think what happens is, lockdown happens, and then we are desperately trying to maintain the patterns that we had before. And I think where we are now in our lockdown life is finally being like, okay, is this really worth it? Like, is this how we really want to keep going with this? And this is a great moment to just pause. And this question about how important is church for our kids in this time gives us the opportunity to ask the question, what is church for? Because I think we rarely ask ourselves that question, but like for us as a family, one, what is like church for in general? But how do we access that now? Because it can become very service focused. And do we get and sit and watch the thing on a Sunday morning? Can become the central focus of it. And church is so much bigger than that. Church is about being loved and loving others. It's about being part of the body of Christ. It's about feeling challenged and encouraged. It's about, being, meeting with the Spirit, pursuing the Spirit. It's about drawing near to God. And so a service can provide some of those things, but what does that look like for us? And so I think it's important that our kids are engaging with church, but whether or not that means you have to force your kids to watch the entire service or not, kind of depends on the answer to your question, what is church for us? And how does this part of the service facilitate it? And so I know some families who are like, actually, my kids really don't feel connected to people. And it makes my kid want to disconnect when I try to force them to sit on the same couch and do that. And so actually what we've done is we've just asked them to be in the room and to have coloring pages, and they can just casually listen to it as we're just in the space, where other families are like, I really want us to worship together and to figure that out. So we're all going to do the worship bit. And then I don't mind what happens after that. Some kids stay, some kids go. I know other people who are like, just wrangling my 4 kids to do this all of a sudden makes it feel religious. And so instead, we're just going to pick out this sermon and we're going to listen to that at a mealtime. And we're going to talk about it. And that'll be our discussion for the evening. And then worship is just something that we do at bedtime when we play our worship music and lay in bed. And there's great conversations. So if I can take the obligation off of you and say the churchness is what's important, then how are we continuing to build relationships with each other? How are we drawing near to God in a corporate environment? How are we serving other people outside of our house? And those are interesting conversations to have with our kids. Are we giving to the other people in the church and our community? Are we playing our part? And if not, how do we want to do that? Talk about church rather than whether or not we engage with the Zoom call and how that's going. Does that make sense?
Really good, really helpful. Yeah, really helpful. Yeah, really good, really good. Rachel, many people will be listening to this, watching this and thinking, I need more from this woman. I need more wisdom. I need more resources. After they finish watching this call, where are some good places that they can access some of your teaching and some of your resources?
Sure. There's if you go to the parentingforfaith.org website, there's a free Parenting for Faith course, video course that's there. There's over 200 articles and videos that are there. There's a whole coronavirus page, I think, that has Facebook Live that I did about how to talk to your kids about fear and the coronavirus. And there's some question and answers about lockdown on there. But I'd also encourage you to join our Facebook page, Parenting for Faith Facebook, because we're constantly adding things and doing things. We just made a home journal for families because God's doing stuff and it's really hard to capture that. So we've made like a 10-page journal that you can print out at home that's just like, where is God in my house and how is he meeting with us, and just something to work through with your kids to capture some of these things if you want. That's free and on the website as well. And there's also a podcast. There's 65 episodes right now of a weekly podcast we do for parents that just has all sorts of things like, how do you talk about the wrath of God with kids? And my kid has additional needs. How do I help them hear God's voice? And just everything in between. So link in. But also you have Leslie there, who's a wise and wonderful woman. So, go to her.
I think she's busy with her 4, to be honest. We'll put all the links to Rachel's stuff in the descriptions, and anywhere that we post this, we'll get the links to Rachel's stuff. We really love it, and we've really benefited from it as a church. We're coming towards the end of our time. I'm going to do one quick fire round, Rachel. So it's kind of one word answers, and then we'll finish with the question: is there anything else you'd like to say? Quick fire round. Texting or talking?
Texting.
Favorite day of the week?
Saturday.
Favorite place in the UK?
The beach, anywhere.
Okay. Childhood nickname?
Guacamole.
Last song you can remember listening to?
Sound of Silence by Disturbed.
Would you rather be able to speak every language in the world or be able to talk to animals?
Every language in the world.
Favourite holiday you've been on?
Israel, going to Galilee.
How long does it take you to get ready?
4 minutes.
How long does it take your family to get ready?
2 minutes. We're all very pretty.
Scale of 1 to 10, how good a driver are you?
Oh, 10.
Okay. Messi or Ronaldo?
Oh, Ronaldo.
Would you rather have invisibility or super strength?
Super strength.
Excellent. Rachel, thank you so much for your time. Is there any last words you'd like to leave with the people who are listening to this?
Yes. You absolutely can do this, and you're great at it. God would not have asked you to do it if he hasn't given you all the skills and blessing and positioning for it. And so you don't have to be anybody else but you. And look forward to a really interesting season that God is going to weave for you, because you are capable of doing all he's asked you to do.
Amazing. Thank you. Would you pray for us to finish?
Yes. God, I thank you that we are not on our own with our children, but that you are the ultimate father, and that you are discipling us and you are discipling our kids. I thank you that you are whispering to them at night, that you are discipling their hearts, that you are growing them to be more like you. And God, I pray that you would speak so clearly to our children, that they would know your voice, that they would know their calling, their purpose, their sense of being loved by you. And God, I pray that you would open our eyes, that we may see what you are doing in the lives of our kids and follow you. I pray that you give us wisdom beyond anything we've earned. I pray that you would give us favor in the hearts and eyes of our kids, particularly our teenagers, that you would just knit our hearts together as families, that we may walk alongside our kids for a lifetime and help them meet and know you every day. I pray for energy beyond anything that we can muster for ourselves. I pray that every hour we sleep will count as 3, God, through your supernatural provision. And I pray that you would work real miracles and build foundations in each of our families and our communities, that we may see you every day. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Rachel, thank you so much for your time. On behalf of Croydon Vineyard, we just really thank you and appreciate you. And we're grateful. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. I want to come see you in person one day.